We'll be, of course, focusing on some of the news that came in yesterday, including the Kenya Revenue Authority full-year performance, and we'll be discussing that shortly with our market watcher for the day. Before then, let's have a look at the currency, whereby we saw the Kenyan Shilling holding steady against the dollar at 86.7595, and this was on Wednesday's close. It was barely changed from Tuesday's close of 86.7090. Looking at the stock market, on the other hand, we saw the NSE 20 share index extending its rally for the 7th straight day in a row, and it added 0.2% to stand at 4,778.88 points. The index has edged up 4.4% in the 7-day rally, and it is up 15.8% this year. From the beginning of the year till yesterday. Sorry. With us in studio, we have Samuel Geshohi. He's the head of business development at NIC Securities. Many thanks for joining us. Now, looking at some of the news that were coming in yesterday, the Kenya Revenue Authority say that they had collected a total of about 800 billion Kenya shillings, and this was up about 13%. Is it something that you expected?
Well, it was slightly below, considering the fact that the VAT bill wasn't passed in December. I think that they do expect to try and collect more this year. They need to. I mean, more often than not, elections lead to budget crises. We're in that period now. I think, plus with the strikes and all that, I think the Kenya Revenue Authority is really where the focus is shifting towards. So I think, yes, they did better than probably expected. But we do expect that this year they'll be targeting even more. And that's a very important factor for the government to be able to bring up all the programs that they promised.
Yes, you mentioned two things, the VAT bill and also the elections. And they mentioned that the election led to a loss of about 9 billion, while the VAT bill, on the other hand, was a loss of about 11 billion. Is it something, especially for the elections, did you expect a higher loss? Is 9 billion modest, or is it within your expectation?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think it's any loss can be called modest. But I do think that a lot more needs to be done to ensure, you know, whatever tax collection is done is well protected and well used. And yeah, I think probably the election could have been ran better. In terms of the VAT bill, I think it's about what goods should be taxed with that VAT bill and what goods will actually hurt the economy rather than help it, because then taxing, putting a VAT tax on, you know, consumer goods, for example, which are staples especially, will really hurt the mwananchi, and that won't do very well for, you know, spurring investment and leaving at least more money in people's pockets. That said, I think we also have the capital gains tax again, which is an issue that they're trying to deal with. I don't think it's right for, say, capital markets, because capital markets need to be spurred. They need to get the transaction costs need to be cheap, so that you know, it can actually increase or create the possibility of you know, an increase in profits. So I think we have a lot of issues, or a lot of reasons for the government to really look at what the tax regime will be and where we're heading with it.
Yeah. But I would imagine that that's a very delicate balancing act, because they need to create revenues, and they're also talking about harmonizing the tax base. But also going forward, we're expecting a 5.7 economic growth according to the World Bank, and inflation has almost started ticking up, and if you look at fuel, it has also started going up. How then do you see this year turning out for the revenue collector? They had projected to rise the revenues to about 974 billion shillings. Of course, this is from 800, so it's quite a huge jump. Do you see them actually achieving this projection, given those things that we've mentioned?
Well, there'll be a lot of convincing to do. There'll be a lot of fighting to do. There'll be a lot of legislation to do. I think then again, in as much as they do the legislation, they also need to put the systems on the ground so that they can be able to collect the tax. Because, you know, legislation without the systems on the ground doesn't help. So I think that there's a lot to be done, and going forward, we are going to be watching them. We are really hoping that whatever they do, it's not going to hurt development, because at the end of the day, if you had investment, if you had development, then you're not really doing any good to the country.
True. Now let's veer off to the stock market, where you saw Kenya Commercial Bank yesterday jumping nearly 1.2% to close off at above 40 shillings. And we also saw equity on the same hand also rising the same margin to about 33 shillings. For you, looking at the momentum that we're now seeing in the stock market, it's risen for the 7th day straight session. Do you see this being the 8th day, and how do you see particular stocks performing, especially banking stocks?
Well, we are back in the upward cycle. Every year we have, the seasonal cycles. January tends to be a low, March tends to be a high, June it happened is a low. Now we are going towards September announcement period, another high. So that's where most speculators tend to make their money. So getting in at equity at around 31 shillings, they're probably looking to get out at around 36, which I expected to head towards. We've seen Safaricom go from its 640, recent bottom and go up again towards 740. Hopefully, again, after September, we might see a bit of easing off, but towards September, I expect it to continue to happen. We have seen a few, I think there was a bond offer yesterday, and we are starting to see...
From Jamii Bora.
Yes, and we're also starting to see yields on bonds sort of go up a little bit, and also on the inflation side. We remain below the 5%, which is a good thing, but the shilling has taken some pressure. So I think that we will see a bit of flight of capital as well as people start to lock in some of those yields. But if the government can keep inflation at a low, then it's still good for the capital markets, because then they're negatively correlated. If interest rates start going up, then stock prices will tend to suffer. But if we can keep inflation and interest rates low, then we can continue to see stocks.
Of course, even as you mentioned about this being a peak season for the stock market, it's also a peak season for the tourism sector. But we've not seen much activity coming through in TPS arena. Is it something that you expect probably to recover as we go along into the third quarter of the year?
Well, TPS arena, like Kenya Airways, tends to gain more from business tourism rather than, conventional tourism per se. Tourists will tend to come on charter flights rather than the national carrier. They'll tend to stay, travelers will tend to stay in less upmarket hotels rather than TPS is a more upmarket, which will tend to be, a business type setting. So I think as we begin to see now more of those happening, conferences, and the government gaining more credibility, especially now by the way they're handling, their foreign policy, then we should see that pick up, and that will be good for TPS.
Are you optimistic of their full year performance?
Yes.
The half year was not very good.
Half year wasn't very good, but I think it'll pick up. I think the elections definitely hurt them, and there's usually a lag before we actually see the numbers coming back in, because everybody was planning. You don't plan a conference in 3 months. You tend to plan them 6 months, 1 year down the line. So any conferences that were planned in that year towards elections most probably were shifted elsewhere. Any, business meetings would tend to have been done elsewhere. And now they're starting to trickle back in, and then there's an acceleration. So we should see that now start to hit them, towards the end of the year, maybe 6 months down the line. Yeah.
Which stock will you be eyeing today?
Well, I'm still very keen on the big tickets, Safaricom, Equity, Kenya Commercial Bank. I'm also watching Home Africa Limited. I mean, we've just brought it to market, and
it's a stock that has actually doubled since the debut price of 12.
Yes, it did 108%, but yesterday we saw it go down by 10%. But we are watching to see how demand starts to to come on that one, so that we can see where the price will settle down. And I think then going forward, we can now start looking at their plans to bring